It's December 30th, 2024. I'm on my final walk of my 1,000 mile challenge for this year. I chose Lebanon Hills, which has become one of my favorite places to walk, mostly because of how quiet it can be. The irony is that it seems to be chainsaw day, maintenance day on fallen trees and whatnot. And I'm 30 minutes into my walk, and it's the first time that it's been quiet, except now there's an airplane flying overhead, which I expected because we are kind of close to the Minneapolis airport. But it's always amazing to me how much human-made noise there is in the world. I struggle to find places where I can walk, where I can just hear nature and not cars. And then to have on top of it chainsaws, which echo throughout the whole forest. So it's otherwise a beautiful day. It's about 31 degrees. It's beautifully, lusciously foggy. Lovely mud all over the ground, none of which bothers me in the slightest. I have learned to walk in almost every kind of weather and temperature, and just being in nature for a while gets you in sync with it enough that it doesn't really bother you if you dress well for it, and I've dressed pretty well for today's weather. So I'm just going to enjoy this last walk. I technically have 4.7 miles left in the walk, and I'm just gonna crack it all out in one 5-mile walk today and hope that the rest of the walk has some silence to it. Hello everybody, and welcome to the channel. I'm Pastor Siri, a Lutheran pastor and spiritual seeker. And as I said in the intro, I did a 1,000 mile walking challenge. So because it was a year of a leap year, there were 366 days of the year. I basically used that to divide 1,000 and got a daily mileage of 2.73 miles, which really isn't that far. It's about a 45-minute walk each day. But the whole reason that I got into this in the first place is because I've been researching the Camino de Santiago, and I really at some point want to do that. And I was looking at potential training schedules of how you can build up your mileage. And along the way, as I'm researching this, I popped up some videos on YouTube about walking 1,000 miles in a year. And that really got me very intrigued. I like to be in nature, I like to hike, I like to walk, and so I thought this could be a really great way for me to get in some good mileage, to see what it's like to push myself just a little bit in my walking, and along the way, maybe I will be more physically prepared for when I do get to the Camino de Santiago. I want to share with you some of the things that I learned from this journey, especially in case you might want to do the same thing. So I had a few obstacles that I had to deal with over the course of the year. The first was right away in the beginning of the year. I'm gluten sensitive, which means that if I have too much gluten in my diet, my knees will start to ache. And I had figured this out several years ago. I can have a little bit of gluten and it's okay, but apparently I overindulged about a year ago on Christmas and New Year's Eve. And when I finally started walking in my challenge, I noticed that for several days in a row, my knees were really aching afterwards. And I kind of got nervous. I had a moment where I wasn't sure if it was the gluten or was I actually hurting my knees by walking a little bit more. Just to clarify, I already am someone who exercises regularly, but that is a lot more of weight training and F45 yoga with little bits of walking. And I might walk around my neighborhood. The big route was like 2.2 miles. So suddenly doing like 3 miles every day, I didn't think that should hurt my knees, but sure enough, after the gluten got out of my system, that wasn't a problem anymore. I did also get new shoes just in case. And the same thing happened to me later in the summer, about August. My knees started to hurt again. This time it wasn't a diet issue, but I did realize and add up all my mileage and go, I've been walking on these shoes now for over 600 miles. They weren't the highest quality shoe, so it's probably time to invest in new ones. And sure enough, that did make a difference. So I would definitely suggest that you make sure that your diet is one where if there's something that might be causing you inflammation, just notice that, and that can make the walking experience much better. Also good shoes. And then the third one that I had not really thought much about until I was talking with a woman who's an Ayurvedic practitioner was just the idea of your body being depleted, that actually your joints are lubricated by water. And when you are dehydrated, those joints go from buoyant to much more tight together. I don't know how to say it, but you understand my meaning, right? And so I was actually noticing that after some of my longer walks, I would sort of feel an achiness in my knees and my hips and other places. And her suggestion was just to really make sure that I was drinking water. And again, that made a big difference. The other thing that I had to think about was the rigidity of my rules. One of the rules that I had learned from watching some of the videos was that the walk you do every day has to be a dedicated walk, meaning you're not going to take the steps that you've done throughout the whole day on your Fitbit and divide it up and go, oh yeah, over the course of the day, I totally walked 3 miles, and then write it down. That's a stepping challenge. That's not a mileage challenge. And I didn't want to get myself into a situation where I was cheating and giving myself loopholes. And so especially the first half, I was very rigid about making sure it was a dedicated walk where I was going out there, getting my 2, 3, 4 miles, and then I was writing that down. Unfortunately, what started to happen was I had a very busy schedule with some continuing ed that I was doing. I had a very busy schedule as I was taking on a yoga teaching certification process. And then on top of it, I'm trying to squeeze in my walking, and I'm trying to get my youngest to go for more walks. And they didn't want to walk more than a mile. And so I was going on a walk with them and trying to fit in a whole separate walk of 2.73 miles. In short, I was constantly filling my schedule with every nook and cranny of trying to figure out how I could get those walks in. And it wasn't until July that I made the executive decision, because I get to do this, there's no one policing me. I made the executive decision to say that it was okay for me to add up 2 separate walks. Heck, 3 separate walks if they were dedicated walks. I just thought there's all of this mileage that I'm doing, these intentional walks, that just because it's not attached to the one walk, I was losing. And you might think that's cheating, but eventually I just had to make that decision because there was definitely days in which it was overwhelming for me to try to fit in the walk. And I would say the worst day of the entire year, it was so busy that day that I got in a 0.4 mile walk where I literally went around the block. And that was the only thing I had time for because everything was too busy. And that only took 4 minutes. And so for me to just realize that having a rigidity that was forcing me to give me more anxiety was not healthy. And so I gave myself just a little bit of grace in that area to be able to have a main walk. And if I did another dedicated walk, stack it together. And that leads me to the third thing. Oftentimes you do walk and exercise for stress relief, and that definitely is something that I've used for most of my adulthood. But my husband recently said that he was really glad this challenge was going to be over because he noticed that it increased some stress in my life of trying to get that walk in every day and trying to get in that amount of walk every day. That maybe if I just thought, I'm just going to go for a short walk and that was enough, I would have had less stress. So there definitely were parts of the year and certain days in which I did feel stressed out because I had to walk, which is kind of counterproductive if you're walking and exercising to relieve stress. The fourth thing was that I live in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and so there is just The suburbs are not made for people, they are made for cars. And I did a vast majority of my walking around my neighborhood because it was easy. You walk right out the front door and there you are. And neighborhoods are just not built for that. They're really not hospitable. There's a highway nearby. I have to cross over a bridge with a lot of highway noise. And in a lot of ways, it just isn't always the most fun walking. And unfortunately, there's jokes about how you have to drive 2 hours just to go hiking for 7 miles and back. But the reason for that is the kind of world that we've created. We've created in the United States, especially in suburbs, a car-first world in which pedestrians and exercise beauty is definitely secondary, if not tertiary. And the primacy is to make sure your cars can get where you want to go. And that definitely makes for a difficult walking experience if what you want is nature and what you want is silence and beauty. And so you often have to go to those places. And so it did feel weird for me to get in the car to drive to places in order for me to experience the nature and the silence, but that's what you had to do. One of the biggest benefits I found was it made me creative about my walking routes. As I mentioned, I would walk regularly and I'd walk in my neighborhood and my routes were anywhere from 1 to 2.2 miles. Well, that wasn't good enough. So immediately I got on this great app. The website was open every day of the entire year and it's called howfardidIrun.com. It has maps and walking trails of like the entire country and maybe even more, but I just explored it through the country. And I was able to find, and it gets your mileage in there of every route that I wanted to go. And so I started to look for places that were around the cities. I began to explore a place nearby called Lebanon Hills, which is where I was at the very beginning of the video. I found some really, really lovely places that made me very happy. In fact, when I was experiencing a lot of stress in my life, specifically leaving the neighborhood and going to some of these nearby parks where I knew it could get quiet and I would only be hearing nature and not man-made cars and leaf blowers, it made a huge difference. It really did help improve my mental health in those moments. Some of my favorite hiking experiences were the summer when I went to Maine to Acadia National Park with my husband, and when I was at Point Reyes in Northern California with my girlfriend who would drop me off at various places and let me go, hiking for miles. And Armstrong Woods, also in Northern California. I had some of the most beautiful and enchanting walks of just pure silence, save for nature. And just that wonderful experience of moving my body and being surrounded by trees and dirt and earth and animals. Some beautiful, beautiful experiences.
Siri is so happy. Siri is so happy. Siri is so happy.
The other thing that was a huge benefit was that I learned that I can do longer walks. Now, back in my 20s, I would run quite a bit. In fact, I ran the Twin Cities Marathon when I was 26 years old. But then my knees started to ache and hurt. And so in my 30s, I really decreased how much I was running, and to the point where I stopped running altogether. And so other things like weight training and yoga took a little bit more preference. And it wasn't until I started this journey that I started to do some longer walks, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 miles. And I realized not only how good it felt, but that it's something I can do, that I could just pop out an 8-mile hike through the mountains and I wasn't dead, you know, I could definitely do it. So it really showed me something about my physical body that I hadn't really done before. And then the last thing that I really learned that was a benefit was really that I can go outside and enjoy a walk in almost every weather. I went for walks when it was raining. I went for walks when it was snowstorming. I went for walks in the summer, almost every single kind of weather. The one thing that was really important was dressing for it and being prepared. And probably the only time that I had a really negative experience was when it was incredibly windy and bitter cold, and that wind cut through and I was not dressed in a way where I was prepared. But in every other way, I definitely had a very positive experience if I just planned for it. And there's something about, especially on days like today that are very cloudy and overcast, it can get kind of depressing. For those of us who have seasonal affective disorder, too many of those days in a row can be depressing, but it actually does help then to go outside and walk in that weather. There's something about being in the nature and in the weather that kind of gets you into the vibe and probably the physical movement, but I also believe being outside in nature can get you to synchronize a little bit with the weather in a way where it becomes a little bit less depressing and just you're more a part of it. So I'm going to let myself from earlier today close out this video. I did it, 1,000 miles done, and I did it a day early. And the one thing I have to say is my body feels so good right now. I often think of my body as being this kind of own entity, and she's so happy right now. And I've noticed that, especially on hikes and big hikes going up and down elevation, being in nature, my heart, my lungs feel really good. I feel strong. And that really is what I love about going hiking and walking. I will not be doing this challenge next year, but I will absolutely come back to some of my favorite places and go for big, long walks to experience just the joy of being in nature, the joy of moving my body, the joy of this feeling that I have right now, which is great. Thanks for watching.